everybody wants to get united. Like, what we gotta do is meet everybody on 149th Street at the bench.
Your hand style feels off, your throwing doesn't feel quite right, your straight letters don't come out the way you imagine them in your head. Well, in today's video, I'm going to show you guys how to fix those kinds of issues by literally drawing over the work that you guys submitted over on Instagram through the Artist Block Academy, which is a little community that we have over on Instagram in the channels section. All the while, we're going to be rating your work on a scale from 1 to 10, so let's get into some real improvements, no fluff, and head right to the point. Here we have an NSZ Throwie, and one of the first things that jumps out at me is the vast difference in the width for the letter structures. You have a really thick section of the N here. It gets kind of thin here. The S isn't much different, only ever getting this thin, but then we see that the Z gets much more thin than everything else. This is one of the things that I definitely want to change in our draw over, but there's one other thing that also really sticks out at me, and that's how the shapes are a little ambiguous. You have kind of a circle-ish structure here, and then it kind of almost gets to a vertices there, or vertex. I want to take these shapes and refine them. So when we actually go in for the draw over, we're going to end up with something like this. You can see that I changed absolutely nothing about the actual letter structures. They are the exact same letters that he was using before. And we refined those shapes, making them much more definitive in what the shape is actually meant to be. So this is very clearly a rounded structure. Up here we have a rounded top, which you could have also, stuck with that more kind of rounded square if you wanted to. But notice here, there is a definitive pause and then break down into the right. Similar thing down here where there is a definitive kind of soft point to these edges, which you see in these rounded square areas. By committing to a specific shape a little bit more, you can make your Throwie look a lot more clean. Because once again, as you'll notice, this isn't a definitive square top, right? And it's also not a definitive rounded top either. We're still keeping that more rounded nature to his edge the way that he had it. Now, if I had to redesign the Throwie, I would go for more definitive letter structures on the Z. The Z can be a pretty difficult letter because it kind of is a little awkward for newer graffiti artists to kind of work into, as most of the important parts of the letter Z are on the left-hand side, which on Throwies tends to get covered up by the previous letter. We kept this N predominantly the same, but this time we turned that top part into a serif. This is going to help us kind of mimic the top of the S, which comes into a very similar shape right over here. And then for its lower portion, we're going to go ahead and add a little something like that because we know that'll be useful for the Z structure, as you can see right here. So that's a bit of uniformity that we get to kind of take advantage of. Now this top portion is going to reflect the top of our N and the top of our S with this slope downward as it comes in for its lower portion. From there we just have to build out the rest of the Z structure, and there we go. Overall, I'd give this Throwie probably a solid 3 out of 10. It's a pretty good start for, one of your first Throwies. Certainly much better than my first Throwie. There's no question about that. Now, I'm gonna be real with you guys. I saw this piece and I just wanted to share it with you, I'd easily give this a 10 out of 10. Sure, there's always room for improvement. Every artist in general can always improve some way, somehow. So I want to take a different angle with this, and this would require that I actually spoke to him personally and asked him his intentions with his work to see where he wants to take it and to help him evolve in that direction. However, for the sake of this video, I'm going to go ahead and just chat with you guys about how you might do that for your own work. Normally, when you have a skill like this, we tend to fall into the same solutions, and those same solutions to our problems that the name presents result in very similar looking images, very similar looking pieces, which then we describe as being our fingerprint on the art form, our style, if you will. And that's not a bad thing, right? Artist habits are good. They serve a purpose, and good artists should have artist habits, but we can also grow past that. So the way we would do that is we would look at what we do consistently. So if I was him, what I would do is I would start using an F, maybe with a letter distortion somewhere in the stem, to help introduce a different kind of silhouette to that side of the letters, where now you have this more angled left side to your piece as opposed to this smooth stem here on the left. This would be harder to control, but it'd put his piece in a different scenario where now he has to problem solve for how to make that work. And it may also give his Y more room to do something in this area. That way he doesn't have to compress it so much. I also would steer far away from doing these types of extensions and these types of terminals on the letters, because at this point you've mastered those, you learned those, so mixing that up can be a great way to help yourself evolve past that and find different solutions. For the K, I would certainly stop shooting it off to the right hand side, and keep in mind, right, we're not talking about things that he did wrong. None of this is wrong. None of what he did was wrong, but rather we're looking for what he does all the time to find different ways to do new things. The S has plenty of variants, and I would begin to explore those variants. Those variants are immense, and who knows, maybe some of those variant structures will force you to think of a new terminal, a new extension to add to the letter that then you think, oh, you know what? This would look really great on my F. This would look really great on my Y. Or why don't I implement this on my K in this new way? From there, you can also mess with positioning. You can mess with tighter positioning, overlapping your letters more. A great example of this is Saber. He does some of the tightest overlaps I've seen in graffiti. Or you can also separate the letters more, which is a lot more difficult for people to handle. We can also slide letters up or down. And in fact, it might actually be pretty useful for you to mess with positioning in the more vertical sense, moving letters up or down. This would give your Y a little bit more room here in this bottom area. And similar premise to the S, if you had the arm start lower on the K and the leg shot out down, well then now the S has more room up top to slide. So any one of those solutions can lead to a lot of new discoveries, and combining some of those solutions will lead to even more discoveries. So that's how we evolve our style. That's kind of how we take things to the next level. Now, if you guys want to learn all those variant structures that we talked about, I actually have a full list and a full guide that's completely free over on our website, linked in the description down below. But while you're there, pick up our How to Do Graffiti book, especially if you've been feeling lost with your graffiti, you don't know kind of how to get better or how to practice, and you've been a little frustrated. Well, if you want to take all that frustration and confusion out of the equation, our book is the best way to do that. It's the best book on the market because it teaches you each one of graffiti's fundamentals with hundreds of pictures throughout the book to guide you through each lesson. And for that reason, it's perfect for brand new graffiti artists, but also just as good for experienced graffiti artists as well, as there's plenty of information in there that has never been talked about in graffiti's history. Pick up your digital copy in the description down below at theartistblock.inc, or pick up a physical copy over on Amazon. Got both of those in the description. Looking at this joke piece right here, I like a lot of things about it, but there's a few things that really jump out at me. Where if I was there with Joke and he asked my advice while he was painting this, here's what I would tell him. First things first, let's clean up the actual shape of the E. Look at that trajectory of that rounded line, and then look at where it actually aligns. That's not quite right. That's a pretty sloppy shape that we're going to want to go ahead and fix. You see it again right here where the close counter aligns in a much different way than this open counter here. So they kind of bypass one another and they're not aligned properly. That's going to be one of those things that you definitely want to fix and make consistent amongst your work. Next thing I'd say is that we have a lot of negative space here on the left hand side of the name. Let's include a little bit more on the right hand side of the name, namely around the K's leg, which is really tucked in and lacking a lot of power. The letter K naturally weighs a lot more than this lowercase e. And part of the reason the K is lacking a lot of its weight is because this leg goes behind the stem and doesn't really extend all that far out. Now, one of the secret hidden little gems that we did to this piece was that we actually bulked up this center area for the arm of the K. This also was contributing to how weak that letter was looking because not much else gets that thin other than this area, which only gets that thin because this lower portion curves. So here's how I would repaint the piece. Don't mind the blue, I use that as a way in order to kind of hide his painting underneath it. That way it didn't distract from the critique. But one of the very first things you'll notice is that this leg includes a lot more of that space we're talking about, and as a result, the K weighs a lot more. Its presence is a lot clearer in this iteration. It also brings a sense of cohesion and balance to the piece overall, as now all of the letters kind of have a similar power to them. We also refined the letter E quite a bit by making sure that this top trajectory falls into right here and then continues down to the bottom. That consistency is very important, especially for key parts of your structure. So because of that, we also did the same thing here with the trajectory from the close counters to the open counter. And lastly, we refined the shape of the E in this area right here. We opted to, instead of going for like this more ambiguous curve for the bottom, we simply just straightened that out. Now sure, you could have kept it curved, no doubt, but I feel like that was contributing to this not lining up properly for him. So to make things easier, to make things more straightforward, we just made it a solid straight line. Simple change like that, and now the piece looks a little bit more refined. So if I came to this spot and I was looking at this on the wall, I think I had to give this a good 4 or 5 out of 10. It's not a bad attempt at all. It just has some pretty easy to fix basic mistakes that once Joke gets past, his pieces will really see a level up in quality. Rent's style right here is right up my alley. I love straight letters, especially when they look this nice. I'm loving the letter R here. It looks great. But there's a few things that I would change, a few mistakes that I think are really going to help this piece quite a bit. Looking at this, I'd give this a solid 5 out of 10. First things first is these little shines, these little highlights are not at all consistent. You have them on quite literally every single edge you possibly could as far as direction is concerned. You have these on the left, you have it at the top, you have it on the bottom, and on the right hand side. So we as the viewer don't really know where this light source or shadow should be coming from. And when you're doing details like this, consistency is king. The next thing that really jumps out at me that's a little bit bit more of a hidden issue for a lot of people is tangents. Tangents are essentially the relationship between two different lines or two different subject matters within an image, and that relationship causes the two things to look more flat. Let me give you an example. Here is the 3D for the R, going to the right-hand side. Here is the 3D of the O, also going directly to the right-hand side. Now, the direction isn't the problem. Both are going in the proper direction. The issue is the fact that they perfectly line up with one another, so you can't tell where one starts and one stops. And this happens multiple times throughout this image. Redesigning this piece, we didn't really have to change the letters at all because the letters looked magnificent. They looked phenomenal. So instead, we focused our energy on fixing these kinds of tangents, which I'll explain in a second, and fixing these little highlight things that he had going around. We also made one structural change to the serif here on the end, and that was simply just to add more depth and allow this lower portion of the 3D to actually show. But that's more so optional. It's not really something that you need to do. As you can see right up here, we no longer have that tangent from the 3D of the R leading directly into the 3D of the O, and as a result of this, we actually get more depth out of our letters as we're able to see this portion of the 3D from the R go behind the O. And we see this portion of the O clearly overlaps the 3D of the R. That's the kind of depth that we're looking to achieve from our 3D. And all we did was just lower this portion right here. That's it. We just ended this vertical lower. From there, we also almost had a tangent from this portion of the O to this top piece of the E. So I kind of separated those two things just a little bit to help differentiate those two sections. And in all honesty, you might even want to separate them more than what I did here. Next up is the end. Because of how many lines and how sloppy these lines were in this top portion, we ended up with a tangent that we really didn't need to have from the top of the end structure to the actual 3D itself. All we did was just sharpen the angle this part of the structure came down. That way we clearly differentiate it from the top of the 3D. And as I said, that tangent really only existed because of how many lines were here. So really all we did was just get rid of all the sloppy lines and keep what he already had. And then lastly, we got rid of a tangent from here to here by simply shortening the 3D just a little bit and allowing some negative space in between those two areas. Little fixes like that is really all you need to take a great piece like this and push it up a couple of levels. Now, if any of this helped you level up your style even just a little bit, then drop a comment and tell me which tip clicked with you. I've got more graffiti tips and tutorials and all that good stuff on the way, so subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want the tutorials that we already came out with, then check out this playlist right up here with more graffiti content right down here, and don't forget the books and description down below. They're the best way to get better. As always, I want to thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys back here next week.